Alrighty, hello and welcome to our last session of the first day of this year's NNP Symposium. We'll be hearing this hour from John Frost, talking about double dimes and the amazing find at the Carson City Mint. John Frost is the Education Chair for the Liberty Seated Collectors Club, as well as a co-author of Double Dimes, the United States 20-cent piece, which is the standard reference for the series, if you're familiar with it. So I am going to let John take it away. We do need to get you unmuted, and then it will be your show.
Great.
There we are.
You can go ahead and put it on the next slide there. Okay, so what I'm going to talk to you today about is double dimes or 20-cent pieces and some really cool stuff that happened out at the Carson City Mint. So next slide. So what I'm going to talk about is first the history and design of the 20-cent piece. I'm going to talk about William Barber, who designed the coin. He was the 5th chief engraver of the United States Mint. We'll get into the series and how to collect 20-cent pieces, go into some of the offshoots, some of the more interesting things like mint errors and exonumia. And then I'll talk about something that happened at the Carson City Mint and how it led to some really cool discoveries. Next slide. So a lot of people don't realize that the 20-cent piece was really close to being part of our original coinage that Thomas Jefferson chaired the committee on. Instead of a quarter, he proposed a 5th or a 20-cent coin as part of the lineup. And the 5th was later renamed the double dime, and it was debated among the committee between the 20-cent piece and the quarter dollar. And as we all know, ultimately the quarter was selected, but the quarter was not particularly popular when it first started. In 1796, they only minted a few thousand, and then none were minted again until 1804. So it was really an unpopular denomination. And a second attempt to create the double dime or the double dime occurred in 1806. The problem is that the bill that proposed this coin was coupled with a Billin 2-cent piece, a low-grade silver version of a 2-cent coin. And there was not only no support for that, but there was a lot of resistance to that. And because the two coins or proposed denominations came as a pair, you got neither of them or you got both of them, the bill failed. A third attempt was made in 1850 because Spanish coins still circulated freely in the US, and there was a desire to get those out of circulation. But really, it wasn't until the Mint Act of 1873 that and the existence of the Comstock loadout in Virginia City that really set the stage for this new, this next attempt. So next slide. So if we look at the coins that the US Mint produced at the beginning of 1873, there's a whole lot of them. I mean, there's a 1-cent coin, the Indian cent, a 2-cent piece, a silver 3-cent piece, a nickel 3-cent piece, a silver half dime, a nickel 5-cent coin, a dime, a quarter, a half, a silver dollar, a gold dollar, 2.5, 3, 5, 10, and 20. So a lot of different coins that people had to deal with. Next slide. So the Mint Act of 1873 did a number of things. It eliminated the 2-cent piece. It eliminated the silver 3-cent piece. It eliminated the standard silver dollar. It added the trade dollar. But one more thing that it did, next slide, it eliminated the silver half dime. And this is actually what propelled the country down the road toward a 20-cent piece. Next slide. So why was the double dime created? Well, there's two different ways to look at it. There was the excuse, and then there was the actual reason. And both of these things centered around the junior senator from Nevada, one John Percival Jones. He sort of touted himself as being the common man but he was really anything but. The excuse that was given because they wanted to produce more silver for coinage was a shortage of change out west. And the whole idea was, hey, you eliminated our precious half dime. We don't use nickels out here. And so there's this rampant short changing problem that if you paid for something, a 10-cent item with a quarter, you're probably only getting a dime back. And so you're getting this huge short changing problem. And this was even romanticized in a book about the Old West. But that had nothing to do with the real reason, because in fact, there was no evidence that any widespread short changing problem ever existed. The real reason was the US Mint was the single largest purchaser of silver bullion in the world. And 3 denominations of silver were just taken away, and the silver miners with the Comstock lode wanted to sell the government even more silver. So the only way to do this was to create a new coin. So the silver lobby was really behind this. And it turns out Senator Jones had silver interests of his own. And the author that wrote that book about the short changing problem, et cetera, turned out that he was a good friend of, you guessed it, Senator Jones. So he was really in the thick of this. Next slide. So in 1874, there was real momentum building. And so it led people to believe that this might actually happen, that we may actually get a 20-cent coin. So the task was turned over to the chief engraver of the mint, William Barber. And he and the superintendent of the Philadelphia Mint, James Pollock, where of course all the dies were made, had a very close relationship. And they agreed that the new coin, if it was going to come out, had to look very different from a quarter. Next slide. So a little bit about William Barber. He was born in London in 1807, and his father was a metallist as well. So he learned engraving from his father. And in 1852, William and his wife moved the family, including their 2 sons, one of whom was Charles Barber, who was 12 at the time, to the US. And for 10 years, from 1855 to 65, William worked between Providence and Boston as an engraver. And in that little image there on the right is a view of the Boston Directory from 1860, akin to the Yellow Pages, except of course no phones existed yet. But his reputation was for excellent work. And in 1865, James Longacre, the chief engraver of the Mint, hired him as an engraver for the Mint, and the family moved to Philadelphia. And when Longacre died in January of 1869, William was appointed by the president to be the new chief engraver, and he stayed in that position till he died at the end of August in 1879. Next slide. So William really only had 2 circulating coins, the 20-cent piece and the trade dollar, but he was a prolific metallist and also did lots of patterns. And some of his best works are considered to be the so-called Amazonian patterns of 1872. They're the first ones shown there, along with the 1877 half union, the $50 pattern, along with the number of metals, very popular metals, the centennial metals. So William was a busy guy, but he really only got 2 coins out of all this. Next slide. So by a happenstance, 4 years ago, I actually met 2 of William's great-great-grandsons. And we unearthed a treasure trove of artifacts never before seen, including some original pencil and pen sketches by William. One of them was even signed. The original presidential proclamation naming him chief engraver, signed by President Andrew Johnson and Secretary of State William Seward. A painting of young William, and only a few years ago discovered the first and only known photo of William Barber in that frame, along with the photo of his wife. Next slide. Okay. And despite the controversy that seems to have come around William, especially with the hiring of George Morgan behind his back, it turns out William Barber was really well liked and very well respected within the Mint. And when he died, there was a special meeting at the Mint for the officers and all the employees to discuss the life and passing of William, and they wrote a touching 2-page memo and presented to the family. William, despite all the trials and tribulations of the time in the mid 1870s, was actually very well respected. Next slide. Okay, so now back to the 20-cent piece and the design process. So a number of patterns came out. The most popular one of them was the sailor head, the one in the middle there, and the shield reverse. But you also see to the right, the Liberty at the Seashore, which is also another popular pattern. And there were actually 2 different wreath reverses and 1 shield. And again, this was because William and Pollock knew that the new coin had to look substantially different from a quarter to avoid confusion. Next slide. Unfortunately, it was not meant to be. The mint director overruled the 2 of them and said, no, you've got to do a Liberty seated design. And oh, by the way, the bill's about to pass, so we need this yesterday. So William had to really hastily engrave a crude Liberty seated obverse just to get it and rush it into production. And the rest is history. With the coin looking so similar, it was just doomed. And in reality, William Barber, I'm sure, would really rather not have had his name associated with this new coin at all. Next slide. And so this turned out to be the biggest flop in the history of US coinage. This is worse than the Susan B. Anthony dollar. And it was really only minted for circulation for 14 months, from May of 1875 to July of 1876. That's it. And 2 more years as a proof-only issue. And again, if you want to be the judge as to why this was a total flop, there's a quarter and a 20-cent piece side by side drawn to scale. Next slide. And the reverse, again, yeah, the eagle's pointing the other way, but come on. If the Susan B. Anthony dollar, which had a different design on both sides of the coin than the quarter, had no chance, how was this going to fare? And the ironic thing is the series, or the denomination was meant to solve a short-changing problem, actually caused one, because lots of people took 20-cent pieces as quarters and found they had short-changed themselves 5 cents. So this was not a popular coin. Next slide. In Carson City in March of 1876, we see from the mint director's report showing daily mintage totals that on March the 8th, $2,000 of 20-cent pieces, or 10,000 coins, were struck of the 20-cent denomination in Carson City. Next slide. This leads us to the 1876 CC, one of those legendary rarities that is often thought of with other super rarities like 1804 dollars or 94S dimes. They did mint 10,000 of them, but they were really never released through normal channels into circulation. Back in the day, no one cared if people bought the New Year's coinage for souvenirs or keepsakes. And so some of them were purchased for face value as souvenirs. Some were kept for assay, others just for keepsakes. But in early 1877, the decision was made to melt all unreleased 20-cent pieces. And in Carson, they melted over 12,000 of them. So they melted the remainder of the unissued 1875 CC coins and all of the 76 CCs still on hand, which was almost all of them. So today, there are actually fewer than 20 known in all grades. Next slide. One interesting thing about a 76 CC is it has a pretty dramatic double die obverse, most visible on the word Liberty on the shield and the shield itself, as well as some of the stars, especially on the left side. But they're all like this. This is not a variety per se. Next slide. Now, because of the way these were purchased from the mint with new money for souvenirs, keepsakes, etc., most of them stayed in brand new condition. And today, I only know of 3 truly circulated examples. And there's an AU-58 that's really not a circulated coin, it just got a little cabinet friction, but it would be a MS-64 if it didn't have a little bit of rub on it. The most famous of the circulated example is the E.A. Carson coin, which is XF-ish details, but was scratched and tooled and polished and retoned. It's a coin that with the naked eye looks okay, but any kind of magnification shows up as significant problems. The other two examples really don't trade at auction. Most of them trade privately, person to person, so they're just never available in circulated grades. Next slide. Then there's another rarity, a super rarity, but it's controversial. And this is the 1875S branch mint proof. And there's simply no record of these, but the speculation is that some special strikes were made in San Francisco to commemorate the new denomination. And there's no record of how many of these they made. But what is clear is that they did, in addition to polishing the dies, they polished the planchets. And the first few that were made are really full proofs. They are the equal of any Philadelphia proof. And anyone that would see one would agree to that. But then they made some additional ones where they only polished the obverse side of the planchet. So it's much more reflective on the obverse than the reverse. But clearly they're not simply circulation strikes. And I would just call those special strikes rather than proofs. But the first few are really full proofs. The thing that makes it controversial is at a later time, and we don't know when, the same pair of dies were released to create regular old circulation or business strikes. And so, and of course, some of those are proof-like and some of those are well struck, but they just don't compare to one of these. The finest known is in a Proof 64 cameo holder. I've seen the coin and it is just remarkable. But most of the rest, maybe other than two additional ones, most of the rest are impaired in some way, cleaned or damaged. And that's just the way they come. Next slide. So if we put aside the branch mint proof, which of course is not a regular issue, and the 76cc aside, which is also not a regular issue per se, the entire series consists of just 6 coins. It was only minted for the first 2 years for circulation and 2 additional years for proofs only. And it's a very reasonable set to complete. One thing that's really interesting about the 1876P mintage is that there were made less than 16,000 were made, including proofs, and yet they were struck in 9 different batches on 9 different days, probably as souvenirs for the Philadelphia Centennial exposition that was going on at the time. So in 1877, they actually made 510 proofs, but we're not sure that that many went out. Some estimates have it as low as 350 that were actually released, but very small numbers. Next slide. So in collecting the series, well, this is basically a type coin for almost everybody. They want a 2-cent piece, a silver 3-cent, a nickel 3-cent, and a 20-cent piece for their 19th century type set. So it's a type coin for almost everybody. The 75S, which was the over 1 million struck, is just common in all grades, including mint state, and is the quintessential type coin. You can find them in whatever grade you want, and they're the cheapest. The Philadelphia issues, not like normal, actually have the low mintages and have, in fact, a combined mintage of just 53,000. These are the scarcest of the business strikes. The 75cc isn't as easy as the S, but it's way more hard, or way more easy to find than the Philadelphia issues, but it costs more because of the CC mint mark. The proof-only issues are tough, but they do appear from time to time, usually at auction, and they can be found circulated. So if you want to put together a circulated set of 20-cent pieces, you can find one of the rare 77 and 78 proofs circulated. Next slide. For such a short series, this is just a wonderful play area for the varieties collector. There are 6 misplaced dates, 4 repunch mint marks, 2 double dies, any number of dies that develop major die cracks, and even cuds. And so this is a variety specialist, again, dream. And you can see some of them there. I think on the next slide, we show the 4 repunched mint marks. One of them is fairly dramatic. Sometimes it's called the $ variety because it has 2 complete sets of serifs. The other 3 are very minor, and one of them almost always comes with a very filled mint mark. Next slide. For the misplaced dates, whether they were just testing die hardness, but for whatever reason, the tops of digits appear in the denticles below the date on a number of obverse dies. So there's tops of 8s, there's a 1 there. The middle picture on the right is the top of a 5 in the denticles. And even the 76cc has a misplaced date. That's the lower right picture. There's the top of the 8, and then the second arrow points to a little stub, which is the upper part of the serif of the 7. Now, what's nice is, except for the 76cc, of course, all of these misplaced dates and repunched mint marks occur on common die marriages. So they're easy to find and you don't have to pay a premium for them. Next slide. So someone like me, which has made a big study of this series for more years than I'd like to admit, my co-author and I try to identify unique die markers that allow us to determine that this particular obverse or reverse die is different from another one. So we look for things like scratches in the dies that produce a raised line, like in the upper left, and in the middle upper picture, there's a scratch in the die on the wing, leaving that little line. There's a knob on the R of America. One reverse die for the 75S was overly polished and actually separated the serifs of the T and S and cents from the main parts of the letters. There's a double die on the second, on the lower right. So we identify these different markers to determine the dies. Next slide. And we come out, oh, that's not displaying right, but we come up with a number of dies. 1875P was struck by 3 obverse dies and 2 reverse dies for 3 die marriages. The 1875CC, 2 obverses, 4 reverses in 5 combinations. The 75S, of course, the biggest mintage, the most die marriages with 16. The 76P, for under 16,000 coins, 3 different obverses and 3 different reverses were used. So when they needed to make another batch of 900 more coins, they simply pulled a pair of dies off the shelf and used them. And so that's why you see so many combinations despite such a small mintage. And then for all the other dates, only 1 marriage each. Next slide. So now we get into the really geeky stuff that, you know, some of us actually find interesting because we like learning how things were made. So we try to sequence the use of the dies based on die cracks and die wear, because they didn't always replace the dies as a pair. Sometimes they would just replace the reverse die or replace the obverse die or just take dies off the shelf. So they came in different combinations. So we look at things like die cracks and the progression of them, or how sharp is a die gouge going to be, because as the die is used, it'll start wearing out and becoming less sharp. And we even found a remarriage. And so here's a situation, and you can advance 1 slide. So we have this obverse die. It has the 5 in the denticles where the arrow is pointing below the 7. And it used the top mint mark with a very slight repunching and started striking some coins. And on that obverse die, there was no die crack to the right of the stars next to the cap. Then they took off that reverse die, you can advance the slide, and put on the widely doubled S mint mark and struck lots of coins. I mean, lots and lots of coins. And during this time, not only does this reverse start cracking very badly, but the obverse develops the die crack in the picture to the right of the stars next to the cap. Then, after they replaced the broken reverse die, you can advance the slide, they put the original reverse with the slight repunched S back on, but now all of these coins have that die crack on the obverse to the right. And so we know that this remarriage had to have occurred because there are some without the die crack, there's some with it, and the die crack actually forms during the other mint mark. So in doing this kind of study, we actually are able to figure out the sequence in which the dies were used. So this is really geeky stuff, not for everybody. Next slide. So for mint errors, on 20-cent pieces, again, they were minted for circulation for 14 months. So errors are going to be very, very scarce to just outright rare. And all the basic error types are kind of known. So you see there a partial collar strike. You see an off-center coin in the middle. There's a very minor rim clip planchet on the top right coin, a lamination. Even there are 2 known clamshell errors where the coin actually splits along the side and opens up like a clamshell. So these are all very, very rare kinds of errors. Next slide. And exonumia as well is also hard to come by. Things like love tokens, they're scarce but not rare, but other things like elongated coins, cutouts, potty coins. I know of 2 potty 20-cent pieces, counterstamp coins. These things are really very hard to come by on 20-cent pieces and are highly prized. A friend of mine has the love token with the piano engraving on the back with the 1884 date, and those cufflinks in the lower right are mine, and they're just very attractive, you know, wear to the opera, I guess, if you were so inclined. Next slide. Now let's take ourselves to Carson City. Next slide. So the Nevada State Museum is now, used to be the Carson City Mint. And in 1999, they were doing some landscaping to the right side of the building. There's like a little park there. And when they were digging, they discovered something. And they discovered a pit, and you can advance the slide. It was a pit full of dies, canceled dies that were discarded and buried in 1893 after the mint closed. And nobody knew they were there. Next slide. So the excavator happened to know about coins. And when he was starting to dig these things up, he realized what they were, and he called the curators in the museum. He said, "Hey, Bob, Gene, you better get out here. We found something." And next slide. So this started a fairly sizable excavation where they carefully removed these dies. Many of them had just fused together into clumps with other dies. Next slide. And again, we were just lucky that the excavator knew what he was looking at. And all these dies were canceled, and many of them were just very, very badly corroded. Next slide. So a lot of the dies that came out of the pit look like the ones on the left. And then I went to Carson City to the museum in July of 2013, and I got to see the dies. And I put on the rubber gloves. It was like a kid in a candy store. But I looked at the dies on the right that had been curated, conserved. And I said, wow, what a difference. You know, how'd you do that? Is your process secret? And they said, no, not really. What we did was we soaked these dies for 6 months in, and you can, next slide, WD-40. So they would just put the dies in the WD-40 and leave them there. And after about a month, they'd take them out, take a iron hammer and hit the back of the steel shaft, and some of the incrustation would fall off, and they just put them right back in. And they did that over and over again until they looked like this. Next slide. So this visit, again, was like a kid in a candy store. I'm holding these things, studying them, and I'm like, these are Carson City dies. Next slide. And they existed really for all denominations. You can see in the upper left, the Liberty seated dime obverse. In the lower left, the seated $half obverse. There's a double eagle reverse in the bottom, a trade dollar reverse. And I believe that was I don't remember what the upper right one is. It was pretty bad shape. Next slide. So if you look at this trade dollar die, and you can advance it one, in that little yellow oval, you'll see the two C's that are there. So just really cool stuff. Next slide. So there were 4 dies that were determined to be 20-cent dies. Now, 2 of them had completely corroded to the point where there was nothing left of the striking surface. But 2 of the dies were really bad shape, but had some details. And you can see on the top right, that's an obverse for 1876. But based on the date position, that is not the die that struck the 76 cc. So this was an unused die. Likewise, the whole top 2/3 of the reverse die is pretty much gone, but the cc's you can see at the bottom there were there, and they also did not match any of the known coins. So again, unused die. Next slide. So now we fast forward to August of that year, and I was in Rosemont for the ANA convention, and there was a grad student, a collector, who happened to collect 20-cent pieces. He was excited to meet one of the authors of the upcoming book. And so he said, hey, how many reverses for the 75 cc? And I said, of course, it's 2. And he said, no, I think this is a different die. I think the mint mark's in a different place. And the 2 that we knew about, we called the close CC and the wide CC. And you can see the in the wide CC, the rightmost C is way closer to the leaf than it is on the close CC. And it's also, the first C is further to the left. But if you advance the slide, there's the new one. And it's clearly different. The first C is lower than the one of the close CC. It's a completely different mint mark. Now, how did he just happen to notice this new mint mark position? No, it wasn't the reason. Next slide. The reason that that coin got his attention is because it had some severe die cracks on the reverse that simply weren't seen before on a 75 cc. So you can see, especially in the word 20, some of those die cracks that go down to the rim are they're hard to miss. And that's what got him to look at the reverse and notice, hey, this is a new mint mark position. And it does seem to be a rare variety. So since 2013, so it's been over 8 years, 8.5 years now, there's still only 17 of these known. And believe me, Lane and I and others are looking for them. Next slide. So now, a month later, I'm back at home and I'm back to working on the book, and I'm writing up the new reverse for the 75 cc. And I was thinking back to my visit that summer in Carson City, and I'm like, wait a minute. Those dies that they dug up didn't match any of the known coins. But now we have a new coin that we didn't know about before. I wonder. And so I got out my high resolution photos of the dies, and I got out my photos of the new coin. And next slide. It's a match. And if you advance it again, it will orient that die to be a reverse image. And you can see that it's an exact match. The die crack that's on the coin is on the die, and there are numerous other smaller cracks that are much fainter, but they also appear on the die. So it's conclusive. This coin was struck by that die that they dug up. It's proven. So that was really exciting. Next slide. So during the summer of 2015, the book's been out now a year, and I had found the duplicate of this new variety. I had an idea for an exhibit. So I called up the guys at the Nevada State Museum that I had worked with before and said, I have an idea for a new exhibit. Why don't we take your die and my coin that was struck by that die and reunite them, put them side by side. And they liked the idea. And we worked the entire summer of August, really the summer of 2015 on the design of the exhibit. And next slide. And we installed the exhibit. So now there's an exhibit with this die next to what we call the 1875 CC BF1, which is the coin struck by that die. And they, I told them I have a duplicate, so you can keep this one as long as you think the exhibit is wanted. And they just renewed it last year for 5 more years. So the exhibit will remain at least through 2026. Next slide. And so if you happen to be at the Nevada State Museum and you're the old Mint, and you're going past the Nevada Ghost Town to the coining area where they have the press on display, you will see this exhibit. And on the pedestal there is the die to the left and a little lucite stand, and on top of it sits that coin. And the exhibit is called A Perfect Match. And below it, there's pictures of the die showing the die cracks and pictures of the coin on the other side showing the die cracks. Next slide. So again, it's called The Perfect Match, and it's apparently a very popular exhibit. I've been out there a couple times since then. So if you are there, take a look. Next slide. I will say this in closing with that topic, that to date, that particular 20-cent die and that coin, it's the only one of those dies that were dug up, and they dug up over 100 of them. It's still the only die that's been positively matched to a coin. So that's a very special exhibit. As Liana mentioned, I wrote the book on 20-cent pieces. It's called Double Dimes, the United States 20-cent piece. You have to be almost insane to have nearly 200 pages on a series that lasted 4 years. But also, doubledimes.com, the entire book is online for free. So if you're at a coin show, you can pull out your phone or your iPad and look things up, and it's completely available. Next slide. Next slide. There we go. And the book is a living document because discoveries still happen. In fact, we've had 3 discoveries since the book was published. So the doubledimes.com website is up to date. It has the new discoveries included. In addition to that, for those that have the printed book, we created 3 addenda, 3 PDF files with the updates, so you can print them out and insert the pages in your book. So we've discovered 1 new die marriage of 75cc, a new die marriage of 75p, and 2 new die marriages of the 76p since then. So it's a living work, and the website is completely up to date with all of that information. Next slide. Just for fun, when Lane and I got together for the first time, we brought our respective collections, and nearly 700 20-cent pieces are stacked on the tables or in the boxes. And this is where we really organized our research, because, and we learned some things. He knew some things that I didn't know, or that I knew, and he knew stuff I didn't know, and we learned from each other. And that's how we detected the remarriage that I talked about. So we have the easels with the pictures, and we would study die states and die erosion, and we'd start putting the sequencing together. And we spent an entire week doing nothing but 20-cent pieces. It was a lot of fun. We call it the Double Dime Summit. Next slide. Oh, next slide. There we go. So to summarize, the 20-cent coin, now I will say this, there's nothing unusual about a 20-cent coin. Many countries, in fact, most countries use 20 cents. What's unusual to us is that we have the 25-cent coin, and you don't need both. So the Euro, Australia, New Zealand, they all have 20-cent coins. It's a normal thing. But because we had the quarter, and by 1875, the quarter had been around for 80 years pretty much, this was just a failure waiting to happen, and it was born in politics. They really didn't serve a need. It was just, we want to sell the mint more silver. But as such, they really form an unusual part of our coinage history. it's a short series. It's underappreciated. It's for most people a type coin. But what I find interesting is it does contain one of the truly legendary of all US rarities, the 76cc. Discounting that, which wasn't a regular issue, the complete set is just 6 coins. So you can build a complete set, and none of them is a budget buster. Even the proofs are not horribly expensive. If you discount the 76cc, building a 30 coin die marriage set of all known die marriages is doable and won't break the bank, but it's a lot of work because some of them are quite rare. And you have a reference available for free to help you do it. And again, the 20-cent coins play an interesting role in the dies discovered in that pit, because it's still the only one that's been matched to a die, and it's just really gives a lot of publicity for the series. So next slide, I think that's it. Oh, no, ongoing research. So the work is not done. Lane and I are planning to start work on our second edition later this year. Some of the things I'm looking at right now is I have daily mintage records beginning July of 1875. I'm looking for May and June because I want to study the minting records for Carson City and Philadelphia for May and June of 1875. The reason this is really important for Carson City is that to the right there is a letter written by William Barber in response to a letter from Carson City complaining of die breakage. And we now know that the first 2 reverse dies used in Carson City for the 20-cent piece broke very, very quickly and struck a combined 3,290 coins. So they went through 2 reverse dies with just barely 3,000 coins. So I'm convinced the letter that was written in Carson was in response to the 20-cent dies, but I need the daily mintage records to prove that. But I really do believe that William was responding to a letter and basically said, hey, we made our dies out of the same die steel at the same time, the same way as your dies, and ours aren't breaking. So his letter actually proposes a number of possible fixes. And what we do know is the third reverse die that they used in Carson City struck about 100,000 coins. So clearly they fixed whatever was going wrong with those first 2 dies. So that's some of the ongoing research I'm engaged in presently. Next slide. Photo credits. Senator Jones was from the US Senate Historical Office. James Pollock was also a former governor of Pennsylvania, so I got his photo from Susquehanna Valley. Heritage provided the 1875 patterns photos. The 4 excavation photos were from the Nevada State Museum, and all the other photos I took. So that's all for the presentation. I see we have a couple of questions, and open it up from there.
Alrighty, excellent. That was absolutely fascinating with how they found the dies and then connected those back to the new reverse that was found. Okay, so audience members, you are welcome to ask questions now. If you move your mouse over the Zoom window where you can see both our faces, then buttons will pop up at the bottom. One of them should say Q&A, and you can type in there. I won't be reading off names, so they'll all be anonymous, but there is an option to send it anonymously if you are particularly concerned about identity. So we have a couple questions in here to start off with. What got you interested in double dimes, and do you have a collection of your own?
Well, that's a really good question. For some reason, when I was just a kid, I learned of 2 ultra rarities. I saw an article in Coin World about a circulated 1890 4S Barber dime, and I saw an article about the 1876 CC 20-cent piece. And, you know, for me, a 20-cent coin, when I was just a kid, I didn't even know there was such a thing. And I just started getting into it. And when I got a real job after college, the first coin I bought, once I had a real paycheck, was an 1876p 20-cent piece for a type coin. I wanted the scarcest of the 4. And that just sort of got me started on such an to most people is an unusual denomination. I love showing people my 20-cent piece, and they look, 20 cents, what's that? So that's how I got started. And Lane kind of started in a similar way. And by the time we met, we had both collected the series for over 20 years. And so that's why we were really the right ones to write the book. But that's how I got started on them.
It's a very short series to focus on for 20 years. My goodness.
Yeah.
What kind of financial commitment is deciding to go for a full set of 20-cent pieces?
Okay, so it's actually not a bad budget, because if you want the complete 6-coin set, now again, we're going to say the 76cc doesn't really count, because even though it was legitimately made and legitimately released, it wasn't really a regular issue. So you don't really need one of those. And since some of the ones that are known are in museums, it's really considered non-collectible. So the 6-coin set, if you want, it depends on the grade. If you want just a nice XF AU set, including the proofs, which can be found like that, you're probably talking, barely $10,000. If you only want the circulation strikes, you're really talking just a few $1,000s. It's a very short series. Now, if you want to go into the die marriages, well, the 75S has 16 die marriages, but then again, it's the cheapest coin to get. An extra fine example will set you back maybe $250, $300 max. So it's not a huge budget. There's just no killers in there. The Philadelphia issues are the scarcest ones, but they're underappreciated. And so an XFAU 20-cent Philadelphia coin will run you $500 or $600, not thousands. So it's really a very doable set budget-wise.
Okay, here's one that's a little tangential that I'll offer an opinion on afterwards as well. It's someone who's considering applying to present at a future symposium, saying, did you have to ask permission to use the photos from the sources that you listed in your references?
Okay, so for some of them, they're published free of use if you cite the source. The Nevada State Museum, I know those folks pretty well, especially with the exhibit, and even before then. They're the ones that sent me the photos, and we cited them in the book, and we actually gave the museum a copy of the book, and that was the agreement. So yes, you really, if something is not available explicitly for public use, you should get permission in advance. It all depends on the copyright terms that the owner of the picture has.
Mm-hmm. For the symposium, we don't specifically require references at the end. It's always a good idea. Technically, since this is educational and we're not charging anyone any money to attend, it's not commercial. So it is legal to use images under educational use. It's always good practice to ask people. And like John said, if you need photographs of something like the excavation that you can't just pull from somewhere and you have to ask someone to receive them, then of course you're going to need to communicate with them and explain what you're using them for. So asking permission is always better. But for the most part, if you're pulling photos, say from an auction website, we always recommend citing them, but you usually don't need to specifically ask that auction house if you can use them.
Yeah.
And you're welcome to contact us for more information.
Yeah, before you get to the next question, I want to follow on something again with my relationship with the museum. We talked about the excavation of the dies. Well, before the museum folks got out there, they know some of the dies were removed from the site from passersby, and so as a result, they were on museum grounds, they were stolen. And over the past few years, one person has offered 2 of those stolen dies for sale. They've showed up at auctions. And the last time it was done, I actually let the museum know because they want them back. They were stolen. And so, they were able to talk to the auctioneer. They withdrew the lot. They talked with the consignor. Unfortunately, they had bought it from the original person. So I don't know how but the Nevada State Attorney General got involved, and they got one of their dies back. There's still a double legal die out there that walked away from the excavation, and there's probably more. But again, I work with the museum, so they're more than happy to help me out when I need something from them.
So
relationships in this business is everything.
Oh yeah. Let's see, we have one more in the Q&A for now, so go ahead and send in any last minute questions you have before we wrap things up. Last one I have for now. Do you note the precursor to the double dime, the Spanish pistarine? Thomas Jefferson chose the half pistarine, a coin perfectly familiar to us all, as the model for the federal dime.
Yep, I mean, it went through a number of cycles. I mean, I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time, but they discussed the pros and cons, and things got different names from time to time. And, but it was all around, well, people are using Spanish coinage. And so, in fact, the reason the quarter was selected was it really closely matched, what is a quarter of the real. It's at the 2 bits and all that bit. So that's ultimately what won the decision over. And what happened shortly after is, gee, no one was using the quarter dollar. And so they really thought about changing it. But as we all know, that did not happen. But I suspect if the bill and 2-cent piece had not been proposed along with that coin, we would all be using double dimes today and not quarters. But that's the way it goes.
Yep, here we are. All righty.
Nope, we got another question.
Okay, this one is just a comment saying, thank you for presenting. Truly appreciate you and the other leaders in LSCC. I joined last year and it's been a great and educational club. So,
right.
Alrighty. Then thank you so much, John, for presenting. That was a fascinating little history lesson on a series that we haven't heard much about.
My pleasure.
Very much appreciated. And everyone watching, thank you for attending. This is going to end the first day of this symposium. We'll be back at 10 a.m. Eastern tomorrow with Sean Moffat and Christopher McDowell kicking us off. So hope to see some familiar names in those sessions, and hope everyone has a good evening.
Yep, and see you next time.
Yep.